All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the Entry Level Left. My name's Jared.
I'm Matt.
I'm Nathan.
And tonight we have back with us on the pod, Ian Hinson. Ian, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Good.
Great.
All
I think
right.
you're our
So
first guest. You came back twice, right?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Congrats.
Dude, excited to be here again, man. Thanks for having me again.
Sure.
Of course. Well, we'll definitely get into your report back on what's going on in LA in a moment. But before we get started, we just wanted to state that we on the Entry Level Left stand in solidarity with protesters across this country who are currently not backing down in the face of a system that has really allowed for the murder of George Floyd to take place. And this is a pattern in the United States that is built on a legacy of extremely racist policing. We do not believe that the police, as they currently exist today, have the ability to be reformed. And while we are happy to see some cities taking steps to rethink policing in their communities, we advocate for the structural abolition of policing as it exists in its current form. The senseless violence that is taking place in Black and brown communities has been going on for far too long by the police and their various levers of power in the American judicial system. And we believe that the time has now come for this violence to end.
Right.
So with that said, let's go with some report backs on some of the protests. I know we've been participating in the protests. Ian, you've been protesting, but you're in Los Angeles. So tell us what's been going on there. How have things been progressing? When and where and why did things turn violent? What's been going on in Los Angeles?
Yeah. So basically, the protests in LA kind of happened as a response to essentially the actual protest that started going on in Minnesota. And they were originally organized by like the local BLM chapters here and also DSA. And, they happened probably a few days after things got started to get pretty intense in Minnesota. And I didn't go to like the first couple ones because I didn't actually know that they were happening. But I did start seeing stuff going down like at night, sort of in downtown. That's kind of like been like when it gets dark, that's kind of been like the center of where stuff is happening. And I remember kind of like seeing a like helicopter angle of just people like just going at it, man, in downtown with the police. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, okay, like this is like it's gonna like come over here, like it's gonna start happening over here now. Like sweet, hell yeah, like, let's get into it.
Yeah.
And then like the day later, I was kind of looking around for events to get involved with. And I got a text from the DSA chapter that there was going to be a protest in West Hollywood. And so I was like, cool, I'll go to that. That was at like 1 p.m. The following day. So me and some friends went to that. And I would say like the first hour, I was, pretty stoked that there was tons of people, like literally thousands of people there. And like cars in the street, like just like literally they had the entire road blocked off, like not like coned off, but like people were blocking the road off and nobody was getting mad about it. They were like beeping in solidarity and everything. And I was like, okay, this is cool. And then we started marching and we got probably like 2 blocks down and the organizers were like, okay, like let's turn back around and like go back. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean turn around and go back? Like, why are we turning around? And it was like, oh yeah, because we have, the city like designated these 2 blocks for us to protest. And I remember that kind of like bummed me out a little bit because I was like, I don't feel like, that dynamic is like in parallel with the things that we're chanting, like no justice, no peace. Like, how is there no peace if we're literally playing in the city sandbox?
Yeah,
so
that's one of the things that's been annoying too. Is like, people are kind of just going as far as the police will allow. It's frustrating.
And if you follow their rules in a weird way, it makes it easier for them to ignore you. You know what I mean? Like media wise,
exactly.
There's a part of it that like the defiance is what gets the headlines. It keeps it in the news, So it's like you got to kind of walk that line. At least sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, the city, like there were like city representatives that were like cheering along and were like going and were like marching with us and stuff. And I was like, this is not a rebellion at all. This is just like we're just kind of like playing along. Where it's so I was starting to get a little bit like demoralized. Well, like the police started coming, right? So I guess because of the size, they started like kind of coming, and I started seeing them along the sides, and people like high-fiving them and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is beyond liberal. So maybe about 30 minutes after that, like I'm passing this like gas station, and there's this like police car just like chilling there. And I just see like this firework go off like right near it. And then like just right after that happened, I swear like 5 people just started like just beating on the police car, like breaking it, like breaking the windows and stuff. And then as soon as they broke in the windows, they started throwing fireworks inside the police car, and it caught it on fire.
Oh God.
And then like everybody started running and kind of taking pictures, and it was so surreal because the police went from like dancing and like happy face to like grabbing their like immediately like grabbing their like rubber bullet guns and starting like and pointing them at us and stuff. And it was just like, yeah, this is how, like, mask off, you know what I mean?
Right.
And
so
then
they no longer had to play the game. It was time to show you their true colors.
Yeah, and that's why everybody should be like super critical of all those posts you see going around right now where people are like, "Oh, look, the cops are marching with us and they took their riot hat off and all that shit." Because it's like, bullshit. No, if they need to do their job, which is literally put you down, you know, they will. Right. Like, don't have any hesitations about it.
I mean, as we've talked about previously on the show, you know, cops exist to protect property in this current society. So it's only makes sense when you see destruction of property that's when they, you know, show their true colors. But that's one of the things that's been causing these protests to escalate and, you know, really metastasize across the U.S. is just this. There's a strange violent nature to some of them in certain cities and things like that is causing it to erupt, in my opinion, that, you know, is different from maybe previous protests in the past, like with, you know, anti-Trump protests or things like that. Like there's a different type of energy and a different type of vibe to these protests.
Yeah, and I think that has to do a lot with the timing and just, you know, they did this interview the other day, like some local news station, where they grabbed some like teacher in New York and wanted her thoughts on everything. And one of the things she said that I think really captured, you know, why I think a lot of this is happening, in addition to obviously the murder of George Floyd, is that people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. That was like what she said. And I think that that's so true, because on the precipice of a total economic collapse, a massive transfer of wealth on behalf of the 1% during this COVID-19 shit, people out of work, and then you have this killing, you know, like the state isn't there to help unemployed poor people. They're there to transfer wealth to the billionaire class, and they're there to reinforce state power. And I think all of that just kind of coalesced into this time bomb that blew up in Minneapolis and spread literally across the world.
Yeah, I think we cut Ian off at the part where the cop car was on fire, so I kind of want to hear what happened.
Yeah. So essentially after that, I think people, like my friends that I came with, they, you know, are very kind of new to politics, and this was their first protest and all that kind of stuff. So as soon as that happened, they were like, "Bro, we're leaving." And I was right. They were like, "Are you coming with us?" And I was like, "No, like this is what I live for. Like this, I'm absolutely staying." Like now I'm like stoked now that this is going to turn into some direct action. So they left, and then I kind of just tagged along with whatever kind of, you know, amorphous like mass that I could. And the one that I tagged along with was about 300 people maybe. And they just started like pushing the police back, like pushing the police down the street. And as we would do that, like they would group up too. And then they would start pointing their guns at us. And then we would like get on our knees and kind of like put our hands up and say like hands up, like don't shoot. And then like, you know, they saw media around. And so they were like, oh, well, if we have our guns pointed at people who are on their knees, that's going to look really bad. So they would put their guns down, and then we'd stand back up and start pushing them back. And then we pushed them back past the car that they came in. And then like the skateboarders that were behind us just started beating on the car and like breaking it and stuff like that. And so they like essentially like it was like 5 of them and 300 of us, and they had all sort of the like quote unquote like white allies quote unquote like in the very front. And so I was literally in the very front, like looking these guys in the face, and they were like, you could see like they started to get really really scared of like just the mass of people that were like facing them, staring them down. And then, like out of nowhere, this other cop car came up and like grabbed them, and they got in that car and like started driving away. And we were just like, yeah, like get the fuck out of here, like throwing shit at that car. And then we did that probably 2 or 3 more times. And I mean, by the 3rd time, literally there was not a single police car on that. Like it was like Melrose Avenue, which is like a really popular, like very ritzy center for like shopping and stuff. And like there was not a single police car. Like we could have just done whatever we wanted there, and it was a really cool feeling. Like everybody felt like, like we started chanting after that. It was like started chanting like whose streets, like our streets, and it like usually I kind of cringe at like those kind of chanty kind of things, but like that was one moment where I was like, you know what, like we did, like this is our street right now. Like we took this with like collective power, and it was a really cool moment.
You felt the solidarity, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody felt it. It was like that was like one time, that was like one of the few times in my life where I felt like very reassured that like there's power in numbers, and like we could actually do this thing if we came together.
Definitely. I mean, you're hearing the same sort of chants and stuff like here in Tampa. Like I was out, shortly before we recorded this on June 5th, but I was out in the streets and it was raining like hell in downtown Tampa, and people are literally on their stomachs, like doing like a moment of silence for George Floyd. And then we marched all the way from like one of the like judicial buildings or court buildings all the way down to like Curtis Hickson. And it was really powerful to like see all those people, but also like a lot of friends that are not really political have been reaching out to me to try to join in, and it's really nice to see that. Like some of I went there tonight with 2 of my less political friends, so it was great to see them out there, and it's really like seeming to bring a lot of people together, and it has this very spontaneous feeling to it. But that does kind of make me worry about like how the Democrats and these electoralists are going to funnel that energy into something that is just a dead end, and we're not going to get any demands out of it.
Yeah. And, and I'm, later on, we'll talk more, I think, probably about that, because I think that's a really good point. But I think one thing that kind of made me feel, I guess, optimistic is when all of this stuff started happening, like even when they were showing what was going on in Minneapolis. I think the day that shit popped off in Minneapolis, like I messaged our group chat and I was like, there's going to be riots. I'm calling it right now. And sure enough, there was. But I was still in that moment like, look, this is only going to happen in Minneapolis. This is only going to happen in New York City. It's only going to happen in Los Angeles. It's only going to happen in Chicago. And then all the other cities are going to have, protests with 12 people that show up or something. And here we are, on our like 8th, 9th, 10th straight day of protest in Tampa with huge turnouts, even on weekdays, even when it's, 100 degrees outside, like it was when we were all out on Saturday or whenever it was. And even again, like not, I'm sure to the extent as what it is in LA, but even in Tampa, you have peaceful protesters. And then as soon as, the cops get fed up or you try and pass their line, there comes the tear gas, there comes the rubber bullets. And it's no different here either. Yeah, for sure. And dude, it was even crazier when I went to, because I came home from that protest and then took like a break for a couple hours and then met up with a friend at like maybe 7 p.m. In downtown, and I was like, okay, I want to be like a part of the stuff that goes on, after the sun goes down. And and that was the first day that they that they had established a curfew. So I looked at my phone and I get like an emergency message that says that, you have to be back in your house at 8 p.m. And so I was like, obviously fuck that. That's not going to happen. So I get downtown at like 8
and meet up with another like Marxist friend of mine that lives out here, and he was like, he lives down there, and he was kind of like, okay, like we're gonna kind of just hand out water in the lobby and stuff, and I was like, all right, cool, like I'll meet up with you later, like I'm gonna be out here, and pretty much immediately, literally as the sun went down, just I walk around a corner and I just see like these two dudes just breaking the window of a Walgreens and like going in and just like start like and like just like 15 people probably going in there and starting to like loot it, and people like breaking out into groups and kind of. But I think the thing that's important to think about with that kind of stuff is like the media is being like very misrepresentative when they're kind of showing the act of looting. Like they're kind of trying to present it as like this angry, like rage fueled kind of like thing where everyone is just going in there just to get like blow off steam or something.
Right.
And that's not really what I saw. Like to be honest with you, like what I saw was like people were kind of like having fun, honestly.
Yeah.
Like people were kind of like, man, we haven't been out here in a long time. We're just having a good time, just kind of block party vibe, like.
Yeah.
And it corresponded with a complete just disregard for private property. Like
right.
it was almost like a given that like none of us cared that
right.
we were breaking into a Walgreens or, you know, or like the Jordan store or something, which is like, yeah, that's what we're doing tonight. And people were like helping each other. Like it was kind of like another moment of like teamwork and solidarity. People were laughing. It was very interesting. And it's funny because like I didn't feel unsafe at all except from the police. Like the police were the only thing in downtown LA during a riot with like looting and stuff that made me feel unsafe.
So one thing I kind of want to get like a pulse on from you all, because I know I've had mixed feelings. I know we've gone back and forth with it, you know, as a group. But in terms of what we're seeing across the country and especially, you know, what's going on right now, you know, what are you guys feeling about maybe the outcomes of this, or rather, you know, how are these different than previous protests we've seen? Because I remember after Ferguson, it was like that shit was going on for a while, and I was like, damn, all right, let's go. You know, this was 2015 or something, but obviously that died down, got co-opted. It was under Obama, you know. But what about these? Do we feel are different, or are they different?
I mean, like you said earlier, Jared, it's like people are showing up on fucking weekdays, you know? To show up and protest on a weekday is a pretty huge accomplishment in my opinion. And it seems like every city is protesting, whereas with Ferguson, you know, there was you know, one major riot and there's a few other ones outside of that. But I mean, even here in Tampa, we have everyday protests, you know, over in LA, everyday protests. Were riots, you know, and I think that's something that's really unique to this. I think on social media, you see the same thing. You see, you know, every company speaking some sort of solidarity, even if vague. You see every single person with some sort of opinion on it, you know, whether it's a good one or not, who cares? But it seems like everybody has to sort of be involved in this now. Whereas before, it at least felt like people just sort of ignored it, you know, if they just they weren't political, whatever, they just didn't have to say anything about it. But now it seems like everybody's involved in this, and I think overall that's probably a good sign.
I don't know, like I've been in the streets the past few days, and part of me feels like the energy is kind of waning a little bit, which kind of concerns me.
Right.
But it has been like raining and the weather's been nasty, but there was still like tons of people, like way more people that I could even count, like probably at least 1,000 or more people like in the streets out there tonight. And the other day, yesterday, the 4th of June, I was actually like marching with one of the biggest groups of you know, protesters I have ever seen in my life in Tampa, and I've lived here my whole life. So it was powerful to see that like we were marching like near the highway, but the cops had blocked off the highway so that no one could get up there and really disrupt anything. And they kind of like funneled us into this parking lot, and it was crazy. Like I have never felt this afraid in my life, but I was walking with a group of protesters. We were kind of all like dispersed and like trying to figure out our next steps. And then out of nowhere, I see these like riot cops in full like SWAT gear. They start to like flank us and maneuver towards us. and everyone just started freaking out. They're like, run, run, run. They're gonna attack you. And so I bolted across the friggin' street, like under the highway, and it was scary as hell. Like I thought that I was gonna like have a rubber bullet in the back of my head or something, because they were maneuvering toward us, and it's wild out there. And I really hope that I really hope that these protests continue, because I think with the economic pressures that we're under from COVID and all the different social factors and things like that, we really have a potential to really get real change. But it's not going to happen if like these protests are de-radicalized and, you know, funneled into the Democratic Party. And, you know, you've seen Joe Biden say some shit about like, you know, cops should be shooting protesters in the legs and not the face, and just absolute nonsense bullshit. And then Trump, you know, recently, I think it was today, he's talking about how this is a great day for George Floyd because the economy is booming. And it's like this tone deaf bullshit that just shows you how out of step the establishment is with the world. And I really hope that these protests continue until, you know, we're seeing unprecedented levels of like, you know, just unrest. And I don't know, like obviously don't want anyone to get hurt, but I think on some level, you know, as they say, like riots are the language of the oppressed and the unheard, and that's why they're happening. You know what I mean? And we can't just let them go unheard and just casually file back into this Democratic establishment voting for friggin' senile rapists like Joe Biden, you know?
Right.
Liberals need to understand that that's not going to fix anything. These problems are structural, and you can't shake them until you attack the structures. And those are property, among other things. Like, those are the things that the state cares about and the police care about. Those are the things that, you know, that's when they were starting to see real responses, you know, with the stuff in LA and all these cities all over America. When property is destroyed, that's when you're getting the most media response and attention. It's just how it is.
I mean, in my view, like, I have never, and again, like similar to what you were saying, like I've lived, you know, in or around Tampa my whole life, and I've never seen anything. The only thing I've ever been to that has ever remotely compared was like this march for, like, you know, they called it like fair food for, like, you know, like I think it was for like undocumented workers, like being able to get paid more or something. And that happened in like St. Pete in 2015. It took like 3 months for them to organize. And the whole point was to do this one march, and then everyone goes home and, you know, signs their good and nice little petition. And that's that. You know, that was the only time I saw crowds, these massive crowds. And again, 3-month long process, tons of NGOs involved, all that shit. Now it's completely spontaneous. There's like, you'll see on Facebook like 4 or 5 different organized events all happening throughout Tampa, and all of them have these massive turnouts, which for me, it makes me hopeful. But again, like, who knows what forces are at work already, you know, mainly I'm in reference to the liberal side, like trying to corral this into some kind of, you know,
get out the vote
NGO effort or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as far as how they're different from other protests, I think the sort of police brutality element is very similar to like the Rodney King riots in LA, like here, it was like 20 years ago, probably. What's present in these that weren't present in that one is the sort of the economic pressures that you guys were talking about from the virus, and just sort of like the further decline of like Western capitalism and stuff like that over the last century. And I think sort of that melding together is sort of causing an interesting outcome where people sort of now they have kind of a face to you know, put their internalized, you know, frustrations towards. And that's kind of like the police, you know, and the sort of the state in general. It's kind of, you know, emerging as the organ that is kind of, you know, at the root of a lot of the suffering that's been going on for, like, I mean, the last probably, I mean, really the last like 100 years, but like, you know, it's like a pressure cooker sense in the last probably 5 or 6 years. It's really gotten intense. So I think sort of that melding together of all those factors is what makes it a unique moment for sure.
Yeah. And, you know, I think from this too, we've of course, like, the response has not gone unnoticed by, you know, the president and his little entourage of fucking psychopaths,
Goblins.
But you know, he made these remarks that he's, you know, he's the law and order president, as he's, you know, I guess supposedly retreating to a bunker.
A bunker.
The true hostist in the room. But he you know, he makes these remarks of like law and order. He's the law and order president. You immediately have like a lot of like prominent libs like Robert Reich come out dropping the F bomb, and by that I mean fascism. And so I just want to discuss with you all, you know, do we see any similarities here to what is happening with Trump in this moment, the police, etc., with legitimate fascism, or is this just more of another kind of bullshit lib accusation?
I think it's kind of a decay of, like, you know, liberal democracy. You know what I mean? I don't see it as like fascism, but you know, liberals they're prone to conflate like oppressive or authoritarian structures or actions, behavior with fascism, because, you know, like we've talked about, we had an intro episode to fascism, which I'm sure that we'll expand on at some point later. But, you know, there's so much confusion about what fascism is. And it, like, I think it was someone we quoted in that episode talking about how you could easily substitute fascist for the term bully or, you know, something like that. And I think a lot of liberals just lack the historical context and understanding to really, you know, orient what fascism is within the current moment. There are definitely repressive tactics. Obviously, we know the police is over militarized, and they are overconfident in, you know, doing what they're supposed to be doing for the elite, which is protecting property and protecting capital. So it's just, for me, it's one of those things where I don't see it as like fascist Germany, but I definitely see like authoritarianism in terms of the police and the elites. Like, basically they're in cahoots with the government, and, you know, you're seeing it more and more. Like, and I'll be honest, like in Tampa, I've been biking there downtown, you know, all this week, just doing recon and taking pictures and doing things like that. But I'm seeing a lot of private contractors in the city, like installing devices and installing things under the streets and just doing a lot of shady stuff. Like, I don't know whether they're installing recording equipment, but it's very prescient. You know what I mean? It seems they're doing it in response to something. And literally overnight, they boarded up and barricaded off the Tampa PD after we were protesting right in front of there. So they know, and they are expecting some type of property damage in response to these things. But, you know, I don't think it's fascism. It's more like it's just capitalism doing what capitalism does best, and that's, you know, using political levers of power and the status quo of the state, you know, enforcement to kind of just consolidate power and keep, you know, property and capital protected. That's the way I see it.
I think there's certainly like some sort of like creeping crawl towards that direction, at least. You know, you see like a lot right now that the Trump administration is sort of like in this do now, ask later sort of mentality, where, like, for example, Lafayette Square, where they cleared out protesters just so that Trump could get just a weird photo opportunity that he would never have done. Logically, he's never, ever, ever walked through Lafayette Square or Lafayette Park before. And, you know, just in the middle of this protest, he decides, I'm going to go there. And he's just sort of testing the water, seeing, like, if I just say, hey, clear these protesters, and it happens, is anybody going to challenge this? You know, like, is there anybody out there who's going to actually challenge me on anything that I ever do? And so, like, I do worry about the implications of that. Like, it's certainly sort of scary that we're sort of leaning in that direction. But I mean, sort of like we had in that episode you referenced, Matt, is like, I still don't think Trump is just an outright fascist. You know, we're still in the end like a capitalist liberal democracy right now. You know, these are just the side effects of that. You know, even if we are in decay, it's not quite at the fascism level quite yet, you know?
Yeah. I think something that might be relevant to this question is There's an essay by Herbert Marcuse called Repressive Tolerance, where he talks about kind of the mechanisms by which sort of like bourgeois democracy retains its sort of like hegemony, over like its populace. And like something he says is that, he points out is that like the way that capitalism, operates as a dictatorship is that it's more obscure than sort of the authoritarian regimes in this, like that would like Stalin, Soviet Union, and fascist Nazi Germany, by like removing sort of opposing views even from the table. Like it just completely moves like discourse and language and just even like fundamental political discussion in a way that like there's no even consideration for anything else. And what's happening is that the people are sort of more open to alternatives now because the system is decaying, and so it's having to kind of move away from that sort of obscure mode of authority and sort of something that's a little bit more obvious and a little bit more transparent, in order to kind of like retain its power really over the populace.
Right. And I agree with your points, Ian. And I think that, it kind of also goes back to this whole notion, of Althusser, whatever, however you say it, his concept of like, ideological state apparatus, repressive state apparatus. And, once people are kind of pushing through and no longer really believing the bullshit of like the ideological state apparatus, your media, all of that shit that kind of like obscures, the ills of liberal democracy, then comes in the repressive state apparatus, to sort of beat your head in and make sure you're following good and just law and order. But I think a lot of this liberal response is also related to the fact that I just feel like they do not, understand that everything that's happening right now is perfectly normal under a liberal democracy. Normal in the sense that it's like to be expected. It's not under the aesthetic characteristics that they're used to. This isn't under Obama's administration anymore. This is under the Cheeto man or whatever. And so they feel that now something bad is happening, when all that's really happening, as we've said on countless episodes before, is that now the emperor has no clothes. Now we're seeing everything for what it has always been, in just this more kind of lambastic version of it.
Yeah, you see this happening. Like, I mean, Minnesota is literally the perfect example. It's like Minneapolis has a Democrat mayor, it has a Democrat governor, and it's mostly a Democratic state, and it's still happening there. This isn't some sort of like, oh, Republicans are in control, so now all the bad things are happening. No, it's this is how the system works.
This is a good transition, because it's not like Trump announced he's law and order president, and all of a sudden, the cops were given tanks and riot gear like they have, and assault rifles and all this shit. Like, this has been happening. Like, the police have been getting militarized under liberal democratic capitalism for decades and decades and decades now. And so, just some statistics to throw by you, since we've been talking about Tampa and Los Angeles. Currently we have the Tampa Police Department budget is 162.6 roughly million out of an overall budget of 435 million. So this doesn't include any outside grants they receive, which they receive a shit ton, and outside donations. Right there, that is roughly 30% of the overall budget. Meanwhile, say services like planning and development, public works, utilities, 2 departments responsible for like infrastructures in cities, all that sort of thing. And to compare that with their combined total revenue for the most recent budget was 7.7 million, which is about 1.7% overall. And to compare with the city of Los Angeles, you have the city of Los Angeles annual budget, 10.53 billion, makes sense, bigger global city, whatever. Their police department receives 1.8 billion annually. But you think of Los Angeles, you think huge police department, but even that, that's 17% of their overall budget. Tampa's is 37%. That's a 20% difference between what they take up. So, and this didn't happen overnight. Ever since, in Tampa's case, the Republican National Convention and all the protests that happened with that, the police budget has been going up by millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. This is nothing new. This isn't an anomaly. It's happening across the country. And this has all been happening long before Donald Trump ever got in the White House. So, Yeah,
I mean, just, your cities are falling apart. You see where the budget is going. That's why so many of these cities are calling for just like a defunding. And you're seeing some responses by politicians to defund, but it's nowhere near the level that is necessary. Like, realistically, we don't need cops like militarized we don't need like bulletproof stuff like that. And it gets hard to explain to a liberal, but most of the people, the right-wing conservatives that would be a dangerous threat, they're on the cops' side anyway. So it's, why do they even need all that gear? Like, they've got tanks and drones, and it's like, what is someone to think other than that the state is going to war with their citizens over ideological battles? That's really the way I see this in a lot of ways, like with Trump, what Trump has been saying, and with what everything, from the conservative establishment is parroting. And, some of these protests are being infiltrated by right wingers. Like, you've probably seen the MAGA chuds in the friggin' Hawaiian shirts getting in on the action. And then in some cases, I think it was it was an actual cop that like broke into an AutoZone or some shit and allowed people to loot it. Like, the cops are doing this stuff too to make it look illegitimate and non-peaceful. So it's like the whole thing is like chaotic in a sense. But I mean, in a lot of ways, like, the city funding that is going to these police is quite literally taking schooling and food and all these things out of people's mouths. And it's time that, liberals look at things in this way. It's not about aesthetics. It's not about virtue signaling and retweeting or parroting what your favorite celebrities are doing.
And it's not about Trump either.
Yeah, and it's not about Trump either. It's really about like the economic and material reality of liberal democracy under capitalism. And this is what we've got, because under capitalism, it's necessary for the state to enforce, rule of law and property ownership. And, that in and of itself necessitates, for at least in the minds of the elites and the government and, these conservative ideologues, it necessitates that the police needs to have like a militaristic response. But realistically, I don't think that that's the case. And I definitely think a different society or a different system, even of policing under capitalism, is possible. Like we see in many other like European countries. I mean, that's not the ideal, but you see in France and places like that, like the cops are way less militarized than the US. You have to ask yourself why.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it should be said that, if it would take 100% of the budget to sort of like keep rule of law in check, then they would spend 100% of their budget on, the police budget. Because at the end of the day, like, as much as the state likes to present itself and it likes to present the police force as, an organ that seeks to serve and protect, it's not really interested in that. What it's interested in doing is sort of reinforcing the foundation of the bourgeois democracy, which is property rights.
Right.
So these other things that it diverts, expenses to, those are, in its own eyes, those are luxuries. And really, the most important thing is having a militarized force that's able to protect the property class. So
yeah, and that's the thing. It's just like what's so insane about these statistics is it's like, I mean, Jesus Christ, the LAPD, $1.8 billion and like no N95 masks available during the advent of the crisis. No, we don't have the money for any more affordable housing. We can't be doing that. And keep in mind, it's like, again, that's $1.8 billion. Right. And on top of that, that doesn't include the checks they get from their, little piggy fucking multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar real estate developers that just love the LAPD so much, or the Tampa Police Department, or whatever the fucking case may be, because that shit happens all the time too. So they just have insane budgets, and it's at a time when the state can't provide the means for people to reproduce themselves materially. They have plenty of money to arm the state to repress any form of rebellion.
Right. And the thing is like, to make it clear for liberals that may be listening to the show, it takes about like $500-$600 to outfit a riot cop with a mask, a shield, and all that stuff. Whereas like for a healthcare worker, for gloves, a gown, a mask, that stuff is maybe like $15 per person. So like there's a stark contrast between what the state is spending to make sure that you don't rebel, to make sure that the pressures that capitalism keeps you under keep you where you're supposed to be, in the elite's mind, and keep you, desperate and looking to integrate back into that liquid labor pool that capitalists love so much. And all of these things are put in place and engineered this way for a specific purpose. The state has the resources to have mitigated COVID in a better way, yet they didn't. And it should be clear to like any liberals listening to this podcast, if you've made it this far, the state under capitalism is specifically engineered to protect capitalism, to protect commerce, to protect property over your life, over your health, over all of these things, and despite you, despite the individual, despite the worker. And that's really how people need to start thinking about these things, and not let, Nancy Pelosi and her, scarecrow ass get on television and de-radicalize these protests, because it's what they're going to do, folks. Like, that's what they want to do. They don't want you out in the streets protesting for justice. They want you calm. They want you very, very demure and lax. They want you consuming and buying and leaving their property alone, just allowing them to run their market and play their games and do their exploitation without any peep. They want you to be quiet. That's really what they want. So don't listen to these liberal politicians, Pelosi, any of these Democrats. Don't listen to them, because they're doing exactly what they've been doing, and they're taking a page from the playbook. And don't believe it for a second that they actually care.
As far as what the liberals really, really care about is just social reproduction. So as long as, like you said, Matt, as long as you're buying and consuming, and you're sort of able to reproduce the status quo, then that's really what they're the most interested in. And they'll throw as much money into the welfare state as it takes to sort of have that the society that they enjoy to live in to reproduce itself.
Well, speaking of liberals, they have had just an enormously galaxy-brained take on a lot of this. You had Suzanne Rice, former, state bureaucrat for the fucking Obama administration to the UN, saying that this discontent, this rioting, this looting was probably somewhere out of the Russian playbook. Of course, the tentacles of Russia have not managed to disappear throughout even this crisis, whatever you want to call it. And in addition to this, you hear them saying shit like, "Oh, could you imagine if we had Obama back in power?" And it's like, at times, I literally want to just bang my head into a wall until I cannot physically function anymore, because Obama was literally in the White House under Ferguson, Baltimore, all of that, and nothing changed. I mean, maybe there was some bullshit ass reform, whatever, that clearly has done nothing of meaning nationally. But it's just so mind numbing and blackpilling to just constantly keep seeing this shit all over the place. Right.
When we were out in protests, Jared, we were marching together, and like, there were so many people out there with Biden signs and Biden. And I literally screamed at this girl. Like,
yeah, you did.
I was just like, you heard me. I was just like, Joe Biden is a shameful man. Look up the history. He wrote all those crime bills, and this is what we're protesting. Like, go read, go look at this stuff. And this girl was just like, her eyes glazed over, and it was like she was a deer in the headlights. but she held that sign down as far as I saw her walk away. She was ashamed. Like, and I mean, I don't want to make people uncomfortable, but sometimes you really need to. Like, people need to wake up that this electoral system, this, two-party system that we've entrenched ourselves in, it's not giving us anything, and it's time for something new.
I personally was like pretty hesitant to wear like any political t-shirts. Like, I had a Bernie Sanders shirt I was thinking about wearing, but at the same time I was like, I don't want to like co-opt sort of what's going on, even on like a small scale.
Bernie Sanders can eat my ass at this point.
But you know what I mean? Like, it was a Medicare for All shirt, and I was kind of like, damn, should I wear it? But I'm like, I don't want to steal away from the message, so I chose not to wear it. But you're right. Like, when I got there, I saw all these people that have like Florida Democratic Party fucking stickers and shit on their bumpers and shit, and there was the truck that had like whole signs.
The Joe Biden shit.
Yeah, and it's like, God damn, you guys are proud to come out here and be like the most centrist fucking establishment libs.
Tone deaf.
Yeah, and it's
idiot.
like, and I felt shamed to come out and try to co-opt the message with something that would actually be good for minorities, like, Medicare for All or something like that. It's just, ugh.
Well, and that's actually been one kind of frustration that I have had with the protests in general, is that to a certain point, it does start to feel just like an arena of competing PR campaigns.
Yeah.
Instead of sort of like an actual focused, organized movement that, has a focused set of demands that it's trying to achieve, sort of a teleology, something that they're moving towards. And it just feels like just kind of, again, because we've been so entrenched in the way that liberalism kind of presents everyday life, it is very aesthetic. It's take a knee here, get the pictures here. Let's present ourselves in a way that it seems rebellious and is kind of like rebelling against the system, but not actually present any kind of systemic or structural reform. And then on top of that, have 40 different organizations and ideologies try to come in and claim that this movement is emergent because of them, or their ideology is going to be the guiding one that leads to this problem not happening again. And it's just like it's a very schizophrenic feeling, when you are a participator in it, because it seems kind of directionless. And that's actually been one of the areas that I've been a little bit more pessimistic in, and that's a direct result of being entrenched in the ballpark of liberalism.
It's very like clout miney, and also very like virtue signally, being out on the street, because there are a lot of people out there that like are there for like to show solidarity, but there are also a lot of people just like snapping photos and like just like getting their jollies off to try to make themselves feel catharsis. And that's kind of like what I hate so much about like this liberal aesthetic, like #resist bullshit, is just like there is no direction to it. And that's, it's sad, but realistically, I don't know how long these protests are going to continue. Like, I'm not sure. I can't tell.
Well, I have two things. One, this is still in its early stages. We don't know if this continues, whether or not there will be a program put forth or a set of demands. That was, of course, a huge issue with Occupy, as they had this huge momentum and then just literally did nothing with it in terms of organizing it. And then they all became NGO bots. But with this, it's still too early to tell. I want to be optimistic, but, a brief history of being in this country, I can't help but be a little black-pilled sometimes. But to the other point, I think what is frustrating to me is, I should first state that I'm obviously like overwhelmingly in support of seeing people who I've never ever seen radicalized, or be into politics all of a sudden be very, impassioned about this and going to protests and doing that. Keep doing that shit is great. But the people who are irritating me, and I know this is Ian, you and I had talked about this a little bit last night, is when I see people who are like posting pictures of themselves with their face like fully exposed all over social media at these protests, literally doing the cops' work for them. And also being like, if you aren't at every fucking protest and doing all this shit and posting about this shit every single day, then you're not a proper ally or whatever. Meanwhile, cut to their next post about why we need to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. And I'm like, where have you been this whole time for you to feel that you have a right to like shame other activists, when I feel like, yeah, this is more of a clout game for some people. This is look at me, look what I'm doing, and that's it. It ends after, once these protests end, it's over for them.
It's also kind of like people feeling like, okay, how much do I have to do to sort of fill my, social contract quota,
Right.
And then, and then I've done my part. I mean, that's really it seemed like what the whole Black Square thing was on social media. It was okay, all right, I'm going to do this because everyone else is doing it, and I don't want to appear as if I don't support this movement. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to do my part, and then, okay, got that over with. Cool. I don't have to worry about it. And that's not really how a movement flourishes. A movement doesn't also flourish by having sort of corporations hop on as well and, have like Reebok, riders or something like that get sold into the market, and I think that's something that we're going to sort of have to be weary of, because, what those forces seek to do is kind of scale them back and make them into a spectacle rather than have them actually funnel into any productive outcome.
Yeah, right. It's just a spectacle for sales to get, more consumption going. But one thing I wanted to mention about the protests near us is just like, there are some people out there, like hearing and listening to people, there are some people out there that are saying, like, I literally heard someone say tonight, like, this is a movement. This is like, movements don't stop. They need to keep going. And so there are people that are aware. There is class consciousness out there. Like, I've seen and heard people taunting cops, saying things like, get a real job, why don't you just open a small business? Like, these are literally things that I've heard other protesters yell and taunt at police. So there is an element of class consciousness, I feel, to some of these, while they are very, very like co-opted by liberalism and the spectacle of consumption and things like that. There is like class consciousness to them. It's just not directed because there is no real like leadership. It's just these like off-handed groups that don't really, they kind of just exist in this liberal catharsis bubble, and that's what they are trying to do. I mean, obviously, there have been changes made. The George Floyd's murderer has, his charge has been up to second degree, and there have been changes and strides made. But I just don't think that if we let this taper off, that we're going to see any lasting change, and that worries me. So I really think that people need to keep going out into the streets, like, and keep doing these things, because, like, that's the only language that the status quo understands, is like discord and property destruction, as shitty as it sounds, like, but that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, I think also, like, I want to first say that I think the family deserves, to have these piece of shit, pigs go to prison.
Right.
But I don't think that that's something that we should really, as sort of radical leftist sort of structural Marxists, be putting forth as like, like as like a win for, police brutality as a whole, because that is exactly what liberals do want, is for it to start and end there. Okay, cool, we got justice has been served, now we can go back to normal. And it's like, okay, so if that is going to be the end of this is going to happen again in 2 months.
Yeah, and that's the thing to me, and that I'm concerned about, is that, for me as someone on the left, like, I wouldn't even consider something like a quote unquote reform unless it involves dismantling the police unions and cutting their funding. That is a reform. Okay. It doesn't hit all the things that I'd like, but it's at least a reform that I would be like, okay, nod to that. That's cool, whatever. But what I fear is what happens is this all gets co-opted into go to, www.georgefloydsmemory.com, sign this petition, sign up here to go speak at your local city council for 3 minutes before they kindly tell you to fuck off and you never hear from you again. Just make sure you don't protest, get too rowdy, yada, 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 because that historically is what has continued to happen after these, this energy boils up. Is the movement doesn't keep going, demands don't, concrete hardcore demands don't get demanded, and
Right.
we're left with a bunch of NGO nonprofit startup shit.
Yeah, well, now is the time to keep pushing, because literally the head of the Minneapolis police union stated Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. Like,
Right.
And not only that, but big labor in this country is backing the police.
Right.
There are some structural problems that, like, these things are going to have to wade through if we want any real, demands to be carried out. And I don't know, like, I'm pessimistic about it at this point from what I've seen. Like, I don't know that it's going to be able to surmount these structures of power. Like, we've talked in the past with a friend of ours, somewhat of a subject matter expert on police unions. And for anyone really not convinced yet why police unions are part and parcel to the problem, like, I would recommend going back and listening to, I think it's our episode 19 on police unions.
Yeah.
But that'll give you like a really solid foundational understanding of like how police unions protect police and their negligence, and how it's not really about justice for them, but more just like what they can get away with. And these cops out here really are thugs. Like, they want to profile Black men and all this stuff, but these cops are the thugs, and that's the way people need to start looking at this problem.
Right. And Ian, speaking of this, all these kind of reforms and things getting co-opted, didn't you messaged me something about like the whole notion of like the Minneapolis board discussing like abolishing the police or some shit like that? It was like totally misrepresented in the media.
Oh yeah. So that is another thing that I think that we have to be sort of weary of, is talk about structural reform that actually is just kind of like shifting the signifiers, really. Because what ended up happening is that they were talking about like literally abolishing, right, the police department, right, and a lot of people were celebrating that as a win. But if you actually go into the article and look at what they were really talking about doing, it was literally just pretty much renaming it into like the neighborhood solidarity committee, like watch committee or something. And it was just like, but that is how sort of like, you have that kind of joke in leftist circles about how like social democracy is just basically capitalism and imperialism with like smiley faces or whatever. And that's kind of like what this was too. It was like, it was rebranding. And that's how these people think. It's everything is just a mass of like brands and marketing campaigns. And if something goes wrong, you just start over again with a new aesthetic, a new brand, and like nothing's actually changed.
To sort of speak to like how Democrats, or at least some of them, feel about it. Today, New York Rep. Elliot Engel got caught on a hot mic at a press conference in reference to George Floyd, saying, "If I didn't have a primary, I wouldn't care." So, without the public, while he didn't think the public was listening, he had said words like that, which just kind of shows like at least some of the liberals are just doing this as show. It's not something that's actually important to them. They'll come out and they'll say the words and they'll have the press conference about George Floyd, but in the end, at least some of them just do not give a shit about it.
Honestly, the liberal establishment in this country, it's just such a fucking disgusting, cynical institution that I don't even, if some of them, these people are behind it or supporting some shit, I pretty much immediately am like, okay, what the fuck is actually in this legislation or this bill or this shit that they're proposing? Because it's always a crock of shit when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up how like their cynicism, because like the way that they've sort of been trying to, hashtag cancel the rioters and looters and stuff by cynically applying, like sort of this identity politics argument of like, if you're a white all the looters are just white anarchists and
destroying black businesses.
Yeah, and that's like putting our fellow black and brown brothers and sisters in even more danger. So it's like it's literally trying to turn like radical tactics that have been used by black and brown communists throughout the entire existence of like the American empire into something that like these suburban white anarchists are doing or whatever. And it's like that is the extent of their cynicism. They will do that in order to subvert this stuff, and it's pretty disgusting, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of like white dudes out causing trouble though. Like there are a lot of them taunting police and making it harder for like the black people out there to protest peacefully. Like, because when the police turn on people and it's not going to be the white people. I mean, that's why there are tactics that a lot of these protests are organizing where they're like, what they call white shields to the front, and they have a bunch of white people come to the front because the police are way more hesitant to shoot at or mace white people than black. And it's so clear if you just look at everything going on, what the structures of power, the ideology that's acting on the police, and all these things are.
Well, I mean, I think, being sort of adventurous is, not wise. It's very stupid. But like if you're saying that everybody who's engaging in black bloc or something are just like suburban white anarchists, then like what you're trying to do is sort of subvert, and I'm not even an anarchist, but like subverting a tried and tested like radical tactic underneath this banner of whiteness. And it's that is cynical and kind of dangerous to like a radical movement as a whole, because they can just, if that continues to work, then like I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to rebrand socialism as a whole as a white movement. I think they've even tried to do that before.
Oh, they definitely have. They've definitely tried that. I mean, you always see the Wokeathon 9000s on Twitter always trying to cancel Marx and shit like that. Like it's just always happening. And not just Marx, but like anything that has a Marx tendril attached to it. If you even mention class, you're a class reductionist, racist, white supremacist, whatever.
They'll just say that Marx was mean to his daughter once and shut you down.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But anyway.
I think what you were saying though, Ian, that's a good point. And so it kind of brings us to our next question, which, when all of this shit first started popping off, everyone's talking about the looting, the fires, all this shit. And it kind of brings the question, is looting good? And, why does it happen in these events when these sorts of events pop off across the cities?
Well, it is good. I mean, I think condemning looting is definitely something that, like the argument that I always try to bring up is like, when we talk about looting, like, what are we talking about that's being lost? Because when somebody goes into a Walgreens and they steal, I don't know, a case of water or whatever, like the water itself is not being lost. Like it's still being consumed in the same exact way it would be if it was bought, right? The only thing that's being lost is the profit that was going to go to the company, through exchanging currency. And so, when you see kind of like these people getting very upset at looting to the point that they're ready to denounce the entire movement because of it, you really start to see the kind of mask off tendency for people who have been inundated with bourgeois ideology to kind of put property over the needs and lives of actual people.
It's always the very privileged people that are complaining about it, as far as I've seen. But yeah, you're right about that.
So anyway, because we've been going for about an hour and some change here, let's go ahead and wrap this up. We'll end on a lighthearted note. Obviously, some crazy shit we've been seeing across the world has been happening. My question to the group is, who gets Praxis of the Week? Who has been laying it fuck down?
No, honestly, whoever the fuck grabbed that idiot with the compound bow and took him to the ground and lit his Dodge Caliber on fire gets my Praxis of the Week.
Okay. Ian, who's your Praxis of the Week? Do you have one?
I mean, that one was pretty fire. I got to give it up to the army of weeby skateboarder like dweebs that have been just wrecking the fuck out of the Apple Store lately. I mean, they've really been putting in the work. They've been doing the most. So I got to give them Praxis of the Week for sure.
Sick. Okay, my Praxis of the Week goes to the baller ass Greek communists who attempted to light the U.S. embassy on fire in Greece. I'm gonna go with that as my Praxis of the Week. What about you, Nathan?
I gotta say that 75-year-old man who got pushed down. You know, I don't know if he made it. I hope he made it. Truthfully,
Yeah.
But I think he stepped up. You know, he really, even if not purposely, he
put it all on the line.
He definitely pushed the narrative for sure. I think a lot of people are waking up saying like, oh, a white person got hurt from this? Oh man, maybe this is a serious thing that we have on our hands here, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
That about wraps it up. Matt, do you want to go ahead and close with the
if you made it this far and you really like our show and what we do here, consider checking us out on Facebook at Entry Level Left, same on Twitter. We have a Patreon if you'd like to donate to us. Also, if you are feeling generous, please consider donating to some organizations that are doing good work on the ground or for George Floyd and his family, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all of those people. We'll try to include in the show notes some links and stuff like that for if you're interested in donating in that way. But yes, we hope you stay tuned for our next episode, and thanks for listening to the Entry Level Left.